There are things in the multiverse that should never meet. Realities kept separate not by chance, but by the mercy of cosmic law. When those barriers fail, when dimensions bleed into one another like wounds that won't heal, the consequences echo across galaxies. This is the story of one such catastrophe, when an immortal predator from a world of gothic horror fell into the galaxy's eternal nightmare. When Alucard, the no-life king, crashed into Warhammer 40,000. If tales of interdimensional chaos and crossover carnage set your blood racing, then subscribe now and join the faithful, because in the dark Millennium, even the most impossible stories find their terrible truth. The Emperor protects those who stand witness. Now let us descend into madness. The transition was not gentle. It never is when reality tears. Alucard had been pursuing a particularly troublesome vampire cult through the ruins of Prague when the world simply inverted. One moment, cobblestones and moonlight. The next, a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. Genuine disorientation. The fabric of his existence stretched like taffy being pulled between dimensions, his physical form unraveling into component shadows and blood and ancient will. Then came the screaming. Not human screaming, not animal terror or the death rattle of victims. This was the sound of a billion souls shrieking in perpetual agony, their voices braided together into a psychic hurricane that would shatter mortal minds like glass sculptures dropped from orbit. Alucard's consciousness stabilized in what could only loosely be called space, if space were made of raw emotion, impossible colors, and geometries that hurt to perceive. The immaterium, the warp, the sea of souls. He floated in an ocean of madness. And for the first time in his exceedingly long existence, Alucard smiled with genuine interest. Purple-black clouds of psychic energy roiled around him, occasionally forming faces that screamed warnings or promises or threats in languages that predated human speech. Tendrils of solidified emotion, rage red as arterial spray, sorrow blue as hypothermia, ecstasy pink as flayed nerve endings, reached toward him with curious malevolence. Alucard let them come, let them probe, let them taste. The tendrils recoiled as if burned. "Fascinating," he murmured, his voice somehow carrying in this place without air or physics. A dimension made entirely of psychic pressure and emotional resonance. How delightfully gothic. He stretched his senses outward, and the warp stretched back. Information flooded into him, not knowledge, but raw understanding. This was a realm where thought became reality, where gods were born from belief, and where humanity's darkest impulses took physical form. Demons, entities of pure chaos. Predators that fed on souls, the way he fed on blood. Competition, then. Something massive moved in the psychic distance, a shape too large to comprehend, made of brass and skulls and endless screaming rage. It noticed him, focused on him, and in that attention, Alucard felt something he'd almost forgotten. The thrill of being hunted by something that might actually pose a challenge. "Come then," he whispered into the howling void. "Let's see what passes for immortality in this universe." The first demon materialized 3 meters in front of him, a creature of spiked crimson armor and bleeding blades, its face a twisted mockery of canine fury. A bloodletter of Khorne, though Alucard had no name for it yet. The demon raised its hellblade and charged with a roar that should have frozen his blood. Alucard caught the blade between his palms and smiled. "You're trying to kill something that's already dead." Poor tactical thinking. He ripped the demon apart with his bare hands, tearing through warp stuff and malevolent consciousness with shocking ease. The creature dissolved into screaming red mist, its essence scattering, and then flowing into Alucard. The vampire's eyes widened. The demon's energy, its warp essence, was being absorbed into him like blood into a sponge. He could feel it integrating, becoming part of his vast internal landscape of consumed souls. But different, spicier, more chaotic. "Oh," Alucard said, his grin stretching wider than any human face should allow. "Oh, this is going to be fun." More demons came. 12, 100, pink-skinned horrors with crab claws and lamprey mouths. Corpulent plague-bearers weeping infectious tears, shape-shifting things of impossible beauty and terrible hunger. They swarmed him like antibodies attacking a foreign object, each one trying to rend, consume, or corrupt him. Alucard laughed and began to feed. His shadows exploded outward, becoming a forest of impaling darkness that skewered demons by the dozen. His familiars manifested: Hellhound Baskerville, warrior ghosts, the absorbed souls of everyone he'd ever consumed, and they tore into the demon hordes with savage efficiency. When claws raked through his body, he simply reformed, regenerating from wounds that would atomize lesser beings. And with each demon destroyed, he drank deep of their warp essence. The immaterium itself began to notice, to recoil. This thing, this alien entity, wasn't being corrupted or dissolved or driven mad. It was feeding, growing stronger, adapting. The demons weren't purging an infection, they were feeding a new predator. Somewhere in the incomprehensible distance, 4 consciousnesses vast as galaxies turned their attention toward the disturbance. 4 gods of chaos, each ancient beyond mortal reckoning, each powerful enough to reshape reality with a thought, each now focused on the same impossible question. What is that? Alucard felt their attention like spotlights of divine malevolence. He looked up, or what passed for up in this directionless hellscape, and met their gaze with his own burning eyes. "Hello," he said to the gods themselves. "I'm Alucard, and I think we're going to have a wonderful time together." The warp convulsed around him, and the real nightmare began. The immaterium had no concept of time, but if it did, Alucard had been floating in its psychic currents for what might have been minutes or millennia. He'd stopped counting demon kills after the first 1,000. They came in waves now, organized assaults rather than mindless swarms. Someone, or something, was learning. Good. He drifted through a region where reality was particularly thin, where the screaming of tortured souls reached a fever pitch that would liquefy mortal brains. Alucard found it almost soothing. It reminded him of the best feeding frenzies back on Earth, when entire battalions would fall before him, and the night itself seemed to sing with beautiful carnage. But this place was different, alive in ways that defied his understanding. The ground, though calling it ground was like calling a hurricane a breeze, shifted beneath him. Mountains of crystallized regret rose and fell. Rivers of liquid fear flowed upward into clouds of condensed rage. Forests of bone and sinew grew in fast-forward, bloomed flowers of screaming faces, then rotted into lakes of pus within seconds. Charming interior decoration, Alucard mused, examining a nearby structure that might have been a castle or might have been a giant's ribcage. Though it lacks a certain permanence. A psychic pulse rippled through the warp, and suddenly he wasn't alone. The figure materialized slowly, deliberately, a theatrical entrance that Alucard could appreciate. It stood 3 meters tall, wrapped in robes that were simultaneously every color and no color, its face hidden behind a mask of constantly shifting runes. Twin eyes burned with eldritch fire, and in its many hands it held scrolls, books, and artifacts that hurt to look at directly. A herald of Tzinch, a demon of the architect of fate, sent to study this anomaly. Curious, the demon spoke in 9 voices simultaneously, each one a different octave. You are not of the materium, not wholly. You are not of the immaterium, not properly. You exist in contradiction. Fascinating. The great schemer wishes to understand you. Alucard tilted his head. Does he now? And here I thought I was being courted by the angry one. the one who keeps sending those charming gentlemen with the swords. Khorne sees only a warrior to be tested. Simple. Brutish! The demon's voices dripped with condescension. But Lord Tzeentch sees deeper. You are a paradox. Dead, but alive. Mortal, but immortal. One soul containing millions. A vampire. We have tasted that concept from human minds. But something more. Something unprecedented. Flattery will get you everywhere, Alucard said, his grin sharp enough to cut space-time. But I'm afraid I'm not much for divine employment. I already have a master, and she's quite particular about exclusivity. The demon's laughter echoed like shattering mirrors. Master? You? The thing that just consumed 3,000 demons and grows stronger with each kill. You serve? The creature leaned closer, reality bending around its presence. Or perhaps you mock us, perhaps you lie. Tzeentch appreciates lies. They are the second-best truths. Alucard's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. I serve Integra Hellsing, my master, my leash, my purpose. In her absence I am... He paused, seeming to savor the word, unrestrained. Before the demon could respond, the warp convulsed again. This time, the change was fundamental. A wave of rot and entropy swept across the psychic landscape, turning crystallized emotions into festering sores, transforming screaming souls into plague vectors. The sweet-sick stench of decay filled the non-air. The herald of Tzeentch vanished with a curse, and in its place came shambling horrors. Plaguebearers, dozens of them. Corpulent demon infantry of Nurgle, each one a walking disease factory with a single horn, cyclopean eye, and exposed intestines that trailed behind them like grotesque tails. They carried rusted swords that wept with supernatural infections, and from their mouths came cheerful, gurgling laughter. New friend, one croaked happily, its voice like bubbling sewage. Grandfather Nurgle sends gifts. Come, accept entropy. Embrace decay, join the eternal cycle. Alucard looked down at his immaculate red coat, then back at the approaching plague demons. I'm going to have to decline. I've worked very hard on my aesthetic, and your particular cologne doesn't complement it. The Plaguebearers charged with disturbing joy, their diseased weapons raised high. Alucard's shadows erupted like a geyser of living darkness. They formed into thousands of starving mouths, each one rimmed with teeth like obsidian daggers, and they fell upon the plague demons with ravenous hunger. Where shadow touched demon flesh, the warp essence was simply consumed, ripped away and devoured so completely that even Nurgle's corruption couldn't regenerate it. The Plaguebearers' laughter turned to confusion, then fear. Fear was rare for demons of the Plague God. They existed in eternal contentment, accepting all things as part of the cycle. But this was something outside the cycle. Something that took without giving, something that consumed without creating. Impossible, one gurgled as it dissolved. Nothing escapes Grandfather's garden. I'm not escaping, Alucard corrected, his form expanding into something with too many limbs and eyes. I'm leaving. There's a difference. He tore through the remaining Plaguebearers with clinical efficiency, absorbing their essence, adding their warp signature to his growing understanding of this dimension. With each demon consumed, he felt himself becoming more anchored, more real in this unreal place. The Immaterium was trying to dissolve him, to scatter his consciousness across infinity, but he was doing the opposite, concentrating, solidifying, becoming a fixed point in an ocean of chaos. And then came the whispers, seductive, promising. Dozens of voices offering pleasure beyond mortal comprehension, experiences that would make centuries of existence seem like gray nothing. The psychic landscape transformed again, rot giving way to silk and perfume, and the sound of distant music that made the soul ache with longing. Demonettes emerged from purple mist, their crab-clawed hands reaching, their faces beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Alucard laughed, long and loud. "Oh, this is precious. The dark gods are taking turns now? What's next? A formal invitation?" The lead demonette smiled with too many teeth. "She who thirsts has seen you, perfect predator. You understand hunger. True hunger, endless appetite. Join us. Experience sensation beyond." Alucard's hand shot out faster than thought, gripping the demon's throat. His eyes burned crimson. "I've experienced everything," he whispered, "and I'm bored with all of it, except this." He began to feed again, and the warp itself screamed. In the deepest reaches of the immaterium, where mortal comprehension shattered like glass, four presences stirred from their eternal machinations. The chaos gods, entities so vast that galaxies were mere toys in their domains, so ancient that time itself bent around their existence, focused their unfathomable attention on a single point in the warp. On him, Khorne, the blood god, sat upon his throne of skulls and observed the anomaly with something approaching interest. His realm of endless war and flowing gore stretched infinitely in all directions, populated by demon legions that existed only to kill and be killed in eternal combat. Yet, here was something that fought not for glory or rage, but with cold, practiced efficiency. It killed his bloodletters not in fury, but with amusement. The thought should have enraged him. Instead, Khorne leaned forward. "What manner of warrior is this?" His voice thundered across dimensions, each word a declaration of war against reality itself. "It does not bleed, it does not rage, yet it kills with such artistry." In the impossible fortress, amidst ever-changing corridors of crystallized fate and infinite possibility, Tzeentch watched through 10,000 eyes simultaneously. The architect of fate saw all futures, all plans, all schemes, but this thing, this Alucard, existed outside his perfect vision. A blind spot, an unknown variable, the most delicious kind of mystery. 999 plans within plans, Tzeentch's voices whispered in conspiracy with themselves, and not one predicted this. Magnificent. A creature of contradiction, dead yet alive, singular yet multitudinous, imprisoned yet free. What are you, little paradox? What can you become? Deep in the garden of Nurgle, where diseases bloomed like flowers and entropy was celebrated as the ultimate truth, Grandfather Nurgle chuckled with genuine mirth. His garden was a place of acceptance, where all things returned to the primordial rot, where decay was simply another form of love. But this vampire creature rejected the cycle entirely. It consumed without releasing. It took without giving back. "Oh, such stubbornness," Nurgle laughed, his voice warm as gangrenous flesh. "He thinks himself above the cycle. How precious, how wrong. Everything rots eventually, little corpse. Even you, especially you. We shall see who has the last laugh when entropy claims even immortality." And in the Palace of Pleasure, where every sensation was amplified to the point of agony and ecstasy became indistinguishable from torture, Slaanesh reclined with predatory interest. The Dark Prince had seen countless mortals and immortals alike, had tasted every flavor of experience across the galaxy, had consumed souls beyond counting. But this was something new. Exquisite, Slaanesh purred, their voice simultaneously masculine and feminine, and something beyond either. A predator who has transcended simple hunger, who has made carnage into high art, who treats eternity itself as merely tedious. Oh, you beautiful monster, you perfect weapon. You would make such a delightful addition to my collection. The four gods had never agreed on anything. Their eternal nature was conflict, competition, the endless struggle for dominance over the warp and real space alike. Khorne despised Slaanesh's excess. Tzeentch mocked Khorne's simplicity. Nurgle pitied Tzeentch's desperate schemes. Slaanesh found Nurgle's acceptance boring. Yet now, for the first time in eons, they shared a single question. What is he? Alucard felt their scrutiny like 4 different kinds of divine pressure. Khorne's attention was a weight of pure violence, pressing down on him with the accumulated rage of 10,000 years of war. Tzeentch's gaze was invasive, trying to peel back layers of his consciousness to understand the mechanism beneath. Nurgle's observation was almost gentle, like a grandfather studying a stubborn child who refused to accept bedtime. Slaanesh's focus was hungry, cataloguing every detail of his existence with the intensity of a connoisseur examining a rare vintage. He stood at the center of their combined attention, a point of stillness in the warp's chaos, and smiled up at the infinite void where their presences loomed. Gentleman and lady, or ladies, or whatever Slaanesh identifies as on Tuesdays. He adjusted his glasses with one gloved hand. I'm sensing some performance anxiety here. 4 all-powerful gods of chaos, and you're all just staring. Should I be flattered, concerned, both? The warp rippled with their combined reaction. Khorne's domain pulsed with barely restrained fury. This thing dared to address them with mockery, to stand in the presence of gods and crack jokes like some court jester. The blood god's hand tightened around his throne, crushing skulls to powder. "Insolent!" Khorne's voice shook the immaterium. "You feast on our lesser servants and think yourself our equal?" "Equal? No." Alucard's grin widened impossibly. "I'm just trying to figure out if you're food or competition. Give me a few more millennia of your demons, and I'll let you know which." Tzeentch laughed, a sound like reality crystallizing and shattering simultaneously. "Khorne, you simple brute, can't you see? He wants you angry. He's testing us, prodding, seeking reactions to understand the rules of this new game. How delightfully transparent." "Is it transparent?" Alucard asked casually. "Or is it exactly what I want you to think? Perhaps I'm triple bluffing. Or perhaps I genuinely don't care about your cosmic egos and am simply hungry. That's the problem with omniscient schemers. You always assume everyone's playing chess when sometimes they're just flipping the board." Nurgle's laughter bubbled through the warp like infection spreading through a wound. "Such fire, such resistance. Don't worry, little corpse. Time makes philosophers of us all. Eventually you'll understand. Everything decays. Everything returns. Even your stubbornness will rot." "I'm a vampire," Alucard replied. "I've been dead for over 500 years. I think I've made my peace with decay." Slaanesh's voice was silk and razors. "But have you made peace with sensation? True feeling? I can offer you experiences beyond your mundane earth. Pleasures that would make centuries of boredom evaporate like morning dew. All I ask is that you..." "Let me stop you there." Alucard held up one hand. "I've heard 1,000 devils make 1,000 deals. The answer is always the same. No, I belong to one master, just one, and she's far more terrifying than any of you could ever be." The 4 chaos gods paused, considered, and then, independently but simultaneously, each reached the same conclusion. This anomaly could not be allowed to exist unchallenged. The demon armies began to mobilize. The warp convulsed, and reality, or what passed for it in the immaterium, began to tear itself apart. They came from every direction simultaneously. Bloodletters materialized in formations of 8 times 8 times 8, their hell-forged blades raised in perfect unison. Pink horrors bounded through impossible geometries, giggling madly as they hurled warp fire from their elongated fingers. Plaguebearers shambled forward in diseased phalanxes, their rust-pitted swords weeping toxins that could kill worlds. Demonettes danced between dimensions, their crab claws snapping in hypnotic rhythms that could entrance even the strongest wills. An army, not of hundreds or thousands, but millions. The combined demon legions of 4 gods, all converging on a single point, on Alucard. He stood at the center of the approaching storm, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly, as if considering a mildly interesting puzzle. The weight of their approach should have been crushing. The psychic pressure of so many warp entities focused on one target could collapse stars. Yet Alucard merely smiled. "Now this," he said softly, "is more like it." The first wave hit like a tsunami of claws and blades and teeth. Bloodletters came howling, their weapons trailing fire. Alucard didn't move, didn't dodge, let them come. Dozens of hell-forged blades plunged through his body, skewering him from every angle. His coat shredded, his flesh tore. Blood, impossibly red, impossibly thick, sprayed in arterial arcs. The bloodletters roared in triumph. Alucard laughed. His blood didn't fall. It moved. Each droplet twisted in midair, forming into needle-thin spears that shot back toward their sources. The crimson projectiles punched through demonic armor, through warp-forged flesh, through the very essence that held the bloodletters together. They dissolved, screaming, their forms unraveling. And as they died, Alucard drank. His body reformed instantly, the wounds closing as if they'd never existed. But now he stood taller, his presence heavier, his eyes burning with stolen warp flame. The demon essence flowed into him like wine, into a bottomless chalice, each soul consumed, adding to the vast ocean of death he carried within. "Khorne's vintage," he mused, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Bold, aggressive, lacks subtlety but makes up for it in raw intensity. 7 out of 10. The pink horrors shrieked and hurled their warp fire, multicolored flames that could burn souls and reality alike. The bombardment should have incinerated him. Instead, Alucard's shadow erupted. It spread across the psychic landscape like oil across water, a darkness so absolute it made the warp itself look bright by comparison. The shadow rose up, forming into a massive hound with eyes like dying suns and jaws that could swallow battleships. Baskerville, his oldest, most loyal familiar. The hellhound lunged into the demon ranks, its jaws clamping down on pink horrors and tearing them apart. Each demon consumed fueled the familiar's growth. Soon it was the size of a hab block, then a hive spire, then a mountain. The horror's warp fire washed over it harmlessly, their magic useless against something that was already a manifestation of death incarnate. "Good boy," Alucard called out. "Eat your fill." But the demon army didn't slow. For every dozen destroyed, 100 more materialized. They were infinite, endless. The Chaos Gods could spawn demons as long as emotion existed in the galaxy, and they were pouring everything they had into this single battle. The Plaguebearers reached him next, their diseased weapons cutting deep. Each wound they inflicted carried supernatural plagues, the Destroyer Hive, Nurgle's Rot, the Walking Pox, infections that could corrupt entire planets, reduce populations to shambling plague zombies. Alucard felt the diseases enter his bloodstream, felt them trying to take root in his undead flesh. He absorbed them. The plagues became part of him, integrated into his vast internal landscape of consumed souls and stolen powers. He could feel Nurgle's gifts trying to reshape him, to make him accept entropy, to embrace decay. But Alucard had been dead for centuries. He was decay. He was the end state of life, the final predator, the thing that came after everything else had fallen. You couldn't infect something that was already the ultimate disease. "Nurgle's collection," Alucard announced, crushing a Plaguebearer's skull between his hands and drinking deep of its essence. Earthy, complex, a bit too presumptuous about the whole cycle of life thing. 4 out of 10, points for persistence. The demonettes came last, attempting to overwhelm him with sensation rather than violence. Their touches promised ecstasy. Their voices sang of pleasures beyond mortal comprehension. Their very presence was designed to overload the senses and reduce even the strongest minds to drooling addicts desperate for more. Alucard had lived through the Crusades, the Inquisition, 2 world wars, and countless nights of carnage across 5 centuries. He had experienced every flavor of violence, tasted every vintage of human suffering, witnessed atrocities that would make these demons look like children playing dress-up. He was so utterly, profoundly bored that even Slanesh's greatest temptations felt like elevator music. "Slanesh's offering," he said, ripping a demonette apart with casual efficiency. Pretentious, overproduced, trying too hard to be edgy. 2 out of 10 see me after class. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if watching an immortal vampire critique the chaos gods like a wine sommelier brings you unholy joy. The demon army pressed in, an ocean of claws and blades and corruption. Alucard stood at its center, a fixed point of crimson death in a sea of chaos. His familiars multiplied, hundreds, thousands of them, each one a soul he'd consumed over the centuries, each one given form and fury in this psychic realm where thought became reality. Medieval knights in rusted armor, Nazi soldiers with phantom rifles, rival vampires he'd destroyed. Innocent victims and guilty predators alike, all bound to his will, all unleashed against the demon hordes. The battle became apocalyptic. Mountains of corpse essence piled up. Rivers of dissolved demon matter flowed through the warp. Reality buckled under the strain, and Alucard kept feeding. With each demon consumed, he felt himself becoming more substantial, more real in this unreal place. The warp was trying to reject him, to push him out like a splinter from infected flesh. But he was pushing back, forcing himself to remain, to anchor, to exist despite the Immaterium's protests. He could feel something building inside him. Power, stolen essence, compressed reality. He was becoming a singularity of death in an ocean of chaos, and the pressure was reaching critical mass. It was time to leave. Alucard had consumed enough. His form blazed with stolen warp energy, veins of eldritch power crawling beneath his skin like luminescent parasites. He could feel the boundaries now, the thin places where the Immaterium pressed against real space, where the membrane between dimensions grew gossamer thin. He chose his target, a weak point, a wound in reality that pulsed with the rhythmic pressure of a dimension trying to bleed through into another. "Gentlemen," he announced to the Chaos Gods, whose attention still weighed upon him like divine anvils, "it's been educational, but I think it's time I see what your material universe has to offer." Khorne's roar shook the warp. "You will not escape. The Blood God demands—" "The Blood God can get in line," Alucard interrupted. "I've dealt with angry gods before. They're always so dramatic about it." He gathered the stolen essence, the compressed power of tens of thousands of consumed demons, and focused it into a single point. His right hand became a spear of solidified darkness and crimson energy, reality itself screaming as it took shape. Then he thrust it forward into the fabric of the Immaterium. The warp tore. Not cleanly, not surgically. The breach was violent, ragged, a wound ripped open by brute force and stolen divine power. The edges of the tear burned with conflicting energies, warp stuff meeting real space physics in a collision that defied both sets of natural laws. Demons shrieked as they were sucked toward the breach, pulled by the sudden pressure differential between dimensions. Some managed to anchor themselves, others weren't so fortunate, dragged screaming toward the tear and obliterated as they crossed the threshold without proper manifestation rituals. Alucard didn't hesitate. He dove through the wound he'd created, his form compressing, adapting, forcing itself through a gap that shouldn't exist. The transition was agony. Every molecule of his being was being simultaneously crushed, stretched, inverted, and reassembled. His consciousness fragmented across 7 dimensions at once. For any other creature, it would have meant annihilation. For Alucard, it was merely unpleasant. He erupted into real space like a meteor made of condensed nightmares. The first thing he noticed was gravity, real, predictable Newtonian gravity. After the warp's fluid madness, it felt almost comforting. The second thing he noticed was the screaming of his own passage. The sound of a vampire forcing his way through dimensional barriers sounded remarkably like a banshee having a seizure. The third thing he noticed was the fortress world below him. Cadia. He didn't know its name yet, but even from orbit, he could see it was dying. The planet was wrapped in the grip of war so massive it was visible from space. Continents burned, oceans boiled. The void around the world was thick with warships, gothic cathedrals of steel and stone, each one kilometers long, locked in brutal combat. Lance beams cut through the darkness. Torpedoes streaked between vessels. Explosion after explosion bloomed like deadly flowers, and above it all, dominating the sky like a wound in reality itself, was the Eye of Terror. The rift between the warp and real space was massive, stretching across the void like a malevolent eye staring down at the galaxy. Through it, Alucard could see the immaterium he'd just escaped, could feel the Chaos God's fury at his departure, could sense the demon legions still trying to claw their way through. Well, he said to no one in particular, floating in the vacuum of space without breathing because he'd stopped needing to do that centuries ago. This looks promising. Below him, on the surface of Cadia, millions of soldiers were locked in the largest military engagement the sector had seen in 10,000 years. The 13th Black Crusade, the final push by Abaddon the Despoiler and his chaos, forces to break the fortress world that had held the line against the Eye of Terror for millennia. Alucard could sense them all. The humans, their emotions burning bright even from orbit. Fear, courage, desperation, rage, all mixed together in a cocktail he found intoxicating. And the chaos forces tainted by the warp, their souls twisted into shapes that sang to his predator instincts. Fresh hunting grounds, he angled himself downward and began to fall. The warp rift he'd torn still hung in the sky above him, a gash in reality that bled purple-black energy. It was collapsing slowly, the universe's natural laws trying to seal the wound, but for now it remained. A second tear in the veil, smaller than the Eye of Terror, but no less disturbing. Ships in orbit noticed. How could they not? Their augurs and auspex arrays went haywire as the impossible signature plummeted toward the planet. Neither Imperial nor Chaos forces knew what to make of it. The psychic pressure was wrong. The energy signature was alien. Every psyker within 1,000 kilometers felt their third eye bleeding as Alucard passed. On the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler, Warmaster of Chaos, felt the disturbance and looked up. His ancient power armor creaked as he moved, the talon of Horus, his lightning claw, sparking with anticipation. "What is that?" he demanded. His sorcerers scrambled, their warp sight trying to pierce the veil and identify the anomaly. What they saw made them recoil in horror. "My lord," one whispered, I don't know what it is. It's not a demon, not a warp entity we recognize. It's something else. Something that's consumed warp essence but isn't corrupted by it. The signature is wrong, all wrong." Abaddon's eyes narrowed. "Then kill it, send a strike force. If it's not with us, it's against us." In the command center of the Cadian fortress city of Kasser Kraf, Lord Castellan Ursakar Creed watched the same anomaly on the pict screens and felt his strategic mind racing. He'd spent decades defending this world. He knew every trick Chaos could throw at them. This wasn't a trick he recognized. "Get me the Inquisition," he ordered, his voice gravelly from shouting orders over weeks of continuous battle. And someone find me a psyker who hasn't gone mad yet. I need to know what we're dealing with. Alucard fell through Cadia's atmosphere, friction and heat building around him in a corona of fire. His coat whipped in the superheated air. His glasses somehow remained perfectly in place. Below him, the planet's surface resolved into detail. Trenches cutting through ash-gray soil, bunker complexes the size of cities, armies that stretched to the horizon. He spread his arms wide, embracing the descent, and laughed with pure joy. Let's see what the 41st Millennium has to offer a 15th century vampire. He hit the ground like a tactical warhead. The impact crater was 30 meters wide and still smoking when the first soldiers arrived. Cadian shock troopers, their purple and white fatigues caked with ash and blood from weeks of continuous combat, approached with laser guns raised. Their sergeant, a grizzled veteran missing half his face to an old orc blade, signaled for caution. Something in the crater was moving. "Identify yourself!" he barked, his voice amplified by his vox bead. "This is a restricted combat zone. You will surrender or—" Alucard stood up from the rubble. His red coat was somehow immaculate despite the orbital re-entry and explosive impact. His wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, though his glasses caught the light from the burning city behind them. He brushed some dust off his sleeve with elaborate care, then looked up at the assembled soldiers. "Where," he asked pleasantly, "is your commanding officer? I'd like to know what fresh hell I've landed in." The sergeant's finger tightened on his trigger. "Last warning, identify yourself or we will open." 3 things happened simultaneously. First, every psyker within 5 kilometers collapsed, bleeding from their eyes and ears as Alucard's presence hammered against their warp site like a psychic battering ram. Second, the Vox network across the entire sector erupted with static and screaming, every channel overwhelmed by a signal that sounded like a million voices dying at once. Third, Alucard smiled, and the Cadian soldiers felt their blood run cold with a terror that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with primal survival instinct. "I'll take that as a no to the peaceful introduction," Alucard said. The sergeant gave the order to fire. 30 laser guns opened up as one, last bolts cutting through the air in perfectly coordinated firing patterns drilled into these soldiers since childhood. Each shot could punch through flak armor at 200 meters. Each soldier could hit a target the size of a coin at 50 paces. Every shot hit Alucard's center mass. His body jerked with the impacts, holes appearing in his torso, his arms, his legs. Smoke rose from the last burns. He staggered back 1 step, then 2. Then he stopped staggering and started laughing. "Oh, this is precious," he said, looking down at the smoking holes in his chest. As the soldiers watched in horror, the wounds began to close. Flesh knitted back together, clothing reformed. Within seconds, he was pristine again. Directed energy weapons. How wonderfully sci-fi. But I'm afraid you'll find I'm rather difficult to kill. The sergeant's training overrode his terror. "Second volley! Aim for the head! Fire at will!" More last bolts streaked through the air. Alucard didn't even try to dodge. Let them shoot, let them see, let them understand the futility of resistance. It was more fun that way. His head snapped back as a last bolt caught him in the eye. Another took him in the temple. A third vaporized his jaw. He regenerated before their shot stopped. "My turn," Alucard said, and vanished. He wasn't fast. Fast implied movement through space. What Alucard did was closer to teleportation, his form dissolving into shadow and reforming among the Cadian ranks. His hand shot out, gripping the sergeant by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Nothing personal," Alucard whispered, "but I need to understand this world. And you're about to be very informative." He bit down. The sergeant's scream died in his throat as Alucard drank. Not just blood, though there was that. Rich with chemical enhancements and stimulants these soldiers used to stay combat ready for days at a time. But memories, information. The sergeant's entire life flashed through Alucard's consciousness in seconds. Images flooded his mind. Cadia, the Eye of Terror, the Imperium of Man, the God Emperor, Space Marines, Chaos, Demons, 10,000 years of war. Alucard dropped the corpse and stood still, processing. "Oh," he said softly. "Oh, this is magnificent." The remaining Cadians opened fire again, discipline overcoming horror. Alucard let his shadows explode outward, forming a wall of living darkness that swallowed the lasbolts harmlessly. From within that darkness came screaming, not his, but the voices of the souls he carried, the millions he'd consumed over 5 centuries, all crying out at once. When the shadows receded, the Cadians were gone, not dead, simply removed, dragged into his internal landscape, added to his collection, their souls and memories his to peruse at leisure. Alucard stood alone in the crater, surrounded by empty uniforms and discarded laser guns, and looked out at the war-torn landscape of Cadia. The horizon was on fire, literally. Promethium refineries burned with chemical intensity, their smoke staining the sky black. Between him and those fires, across a landscape of trenches and razor wire and minefields, 2 armies clashed in brutal close combat. On one side, the Imperial Guard, billions of human soldiers armed with flashlights and faith, dying by the thousands to hold each meter of ground. He could see their formations, disciplined and professional even as artillery tore through their ranks. On the other side, chaos. Cultists in ragged robes, their skin marked with blasphemous runes, traitor guard in corrupted armor, and behind them, towering over the battlefield like walking nightmares, came the Chaos Space Marines. Alucard had seen the images in the sergeant's mind, but seeing them in person was different. Each warrior stood over 2 meters tall, encased in power armor that had once been the Imperium's finest. They wielded bolt weapons that fired explosive rounds, chain swords with teeth that screamed through flesh and bone, and they moved with the coordinated efficiency of soldiers who'd fought wars for 10,000 years. The Black Legion, Abaddon's chosen, and they were heading directly toward his impact crater. "Well," Alucard said, adjusting his glasses and grinning with savage anticipation, "it would be rude not to introduce myself properly." Behind him, the warp rift he'd torn in orbit pulsed with malevolent energy. Ahead of him, the largest war in the sector ground on, unaware that something far worse than chaos had just entered the battlefield. Alucard walked forward, his coat billowing despite the absence of wind, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the scorched earth. Cadia was humanity's last stand against the forces of chaos. But now there was a third player in the game, and he was very, very hungry. Lord Commander Halkoth of the Black Legion had served Abaddon the Despoiler for 3,000 years. He'd fought on countless worlds, slaughtered billions in the name of the Chaos Gods, and carved his legend across the stars in blood and fire. Very little surprised him anymore. The Vox message from the War Master changed that. Unidentified hostile, crimson anomaly, priority Omega Black. The voice was distorted by warp interference, but the command was clear. Capture or destroy, report findings immediately. Halkoth stood in the command rhino, studying the pict feed of the impact crater. Whatever had crashed wasn't a drop pod, wasn't an Imperial asset. The energy signature was wrong. It made his enhanced eyes ache just looking at the readings. "Sorcerer," he commanded, turning to the robed figure beside him. "What am I looking at?" The Chaos Sorcerer, his armor covered in leering demon faces, stared at the data slate with barely concealed unease. "My lord, the warp trembles around this entity. It bears the touch of all 4 gods, yet serves none. It has consumed demon essence but is not corrupted by it. The Neverborn themselves are afraid." Halkoth's lips curled beneath his helmet. Demons don't feel fear. They do now, my lord. Interesting. Halkoth assembled his kill team with practiced efficiency. 10 Chaos Space Marines, each one a veteran of the Long War, each one enhanced beyond mortal limits with ancient gene-forged organs and millennia of combat experience. 5 Warp Talons, jump infantry fused with demonic essence, their lightning claws crackling with eldritch energy. And the Sorcerer, whose mastery of the Immaterium could level city blocks. 17 of Chaos's finest warriors against one unknown contact. It should have been overkill. They advanced across no man's land in tactical formation, their power armor compensating for the weight of their enhanced frames, their centuries of experience showing in every coordinated movement. Artillery screamed overhead, Imperial basilisks hammering chaos positions kilometers away, but Halkoth's team moved through the bombardment like ghosts, each warrior knowing exactly where the next shell would land. The crater came into view. Empty, just scorch marks, and Halkoth's enhanced hearing caught movement. He spun, bolter raised. Alucard sat on the turret of a destroyed Lehman Rust tank 50 meters away, legs crossed casually, chin resting on one hand. He'd been watching them approach the entire time. "Gentlemen," Alucard called out, his voice carrying easily over the sounds of distant battle. "I was wondering when the welcoming committee would arrive. Tell me, are you the Chaos Space Marines I've been hearing so much about? Because I have to say, the mental images I pulled from that soldier didn't do you justice. You're much more imposing in person." Halkoth's targeting systems locked onto the figure. Enhanced. Definitely enhanced. But the readings were scrambled. Contradictory. His armor's machine spirit was giving him errors that shouldn't be possible. "Identify yourself," Halkoth commanded, his voice a vox-amplified growl. "By order of Warmaster Abaddon, you will surrender for interrogation or be destroyed." Alucard tilted his head, genuinely curious. "And if I choose option 3, none of the above? Then you die." "I've heard that before." Alucard stood, stretching languidly. "Usually right before someone discovers I'm significantly harder to kill than they anticipated. But please, prove me wrong. I could use the entertainment." Halkoth didn't waste words. His hand signal sent the warp talons skyward, their jump packs screaming as they arced toward the target. The Chaos Marines opened fire, bolt guns roaring. Each bolt was a .75 caliber rocket-propelled explosive round, designed to penetrate ceramite armor and detonate inside the target. 20 rounds hit Alucard in the first second. His torso exploded. His left arm was blown off at the shoulder. His right leg detonated below the knee. Chunks of flesh and bone scattered across the ruined tank. The warp talons descended like meteors, their lightning claws extended, ready to finish whatever remained. They plunged their weapons through the mangled corpse, which dissolved into shadow and reformed behind them. 7 out of 10. Alucard's voice came from the impossible direction. The Chaos Marines whirled. He was standing among them now, completely unharmed, not even breathing hard. Good initial damage output. Excellent tactical coordination. But you really should verify your kills before celebrating. One of the warp talons screamed and lunged, claws crackling with warp energy. Alucard caught both wrists and smiled. "Let me show you how it's done." He ripped the warp talon's arms off, not with effort, not with struggle, just removed them, tore them from their sockets with the casual ease of pulling wings off a fly. The Chaos Warrior's scream was cut short as Alucard's hand plunged through his chest plate, ceramite and demonic essence and all, and ripped out whatever passed for a heart in a creature half demon, half space marine. The body hit the ground. Alucard dropped the arms and licked his fingers, his expression thoughtful. Tainted. Bitter. The chaos corruption really doesn't improve the flavor. 3 out of 10 would not recommend. The remaining 4 warp talons attacked as one, their training overriding shock. Lightning claws descended from 4 angles simultaneously, each strike powerful enough to shred tank armor. Alucard's shadow erupted beneath him, forming into dozens of spearing tendrils. They shot upward, impaling all 4 warp talons mid-strike. The warriors struggled, their enhanced strength meaningless against the supernatural grip, as the shadows began to drink. Halkoth watched his jump infantry wither and die, their essence drained like wine from a bottle, their power armor clattering to the ground as empty husks. "Sorcerer," Halkoth commanded, his voice steady despite what he was witnessing. "Kill it, now." The Chaos Sorcerer raised his staff, warp energy coalescing around him in visible arcs of purple-green lightning. He chanted in the dark tongue, words that could unmake reality, syllables that had toppled armies and broken fortresses. A lance of pure immaterium energy screamed toward Alucard. Unfiltered chaos, the raw stuff of the warp made manifest, capable of dissolving matter and soul simultaneously. Alucard caught it. His hand closed around the warp lance like grabbing a physical object. The energy writhed, trying to escape, trying to corrupt, trying to burn. Alucard's grin widened. "I just spent the last subjective eternity swimming in that stuff," he said. "Did you really think throwing more at me would help?" He crushed the warp energy in his fist. It detonated, a shockwave of pure chaos expanding outward. When it cleared, Alucard stood unmarked. The sorcerer was on his knees, blood pouring from his helmet's eye lenses. "Impossible," the sorcerer whispered. "You should be... The warp should have consumed me." "Corrupted me?" Alucard walked forward. "I consumed it first. Your chaos gods are powerful, I'll grant you. But I've been eating gods since before your Imperium existed." Halkoth made his decision. "Fall back, all units. Tactical ret." Alucard was in front of him faster than enhanced reflexes could track. "No one leaves," the vampire said softly, "until I understand what I'm dealing with." Halkoth was 3,000 years old, had survived battles that would fill libraries, and had personally killed 2 chapter masters in single combat. His reaction time was measured in milliseconds, his strength could crush steel, and his combat programming was more extensive than most mortal armies' entire tactical databases. None of it mattered. Alucard's hand was around his throat before Halkoth's genetically enhanced nervous system could register movement. The vampire lifted him effortlessly. 200 kilograms of Chaos Marine and power armor held one-handed like a child's toy. "Let's have a conversation," Alucard said pleasantly. "You're going to tell me everything about this fascinating universe, and I'm going to decide whether to kill you quickly or slowly. Sound fair?" Halkoth triggered his armor's emergency systems. Hyperstimulants flooded his bloodstream. His power armor's servo motors whined at maximum output. He brought his chainsword around in a strike that could bisect a tank. Alucard caught the blade with his free hand. The chain teeth screamed against his palm, sparks flying but couldn't penetrate. The vampire's grip tightened, and the ancient weapon, blessed by dark mechanicum priests, forged in demon fires, shattered like glass. "Rude," Alucard observed. "I was asking nicely." The remaining Chaos Marines opened fire. Bolter rounds hammered into Alucard from 10 directions simultaneously, each explosive impact detonating with enough force to crater concrete. The vampire's body was torn apart by the bombardment, chunks of flesh and bone spraying across the battlefield. He didn't let go of Halkoth's throat. Through the haze of explosions and blood mist, the Chaos Marines watched in horror as Alucard's body regenerated faster than they could destroy it. His torso reformed around the bolter impacts. His head grew back from a shattered skull. His arm, still gripping Halkoth, never wavered. "My turn," Alucard said, and his shadow expanded. It spread across the ground like living ink, engulfing the Chaos Marines. From within that darkness came screaming, not from the warriors, but from something else. The souls Alucard carried, millions of them, given form and fury. Spectral hands reached up from the shadow, gripping ceramite boots. The Chaos Marines struggled, their enhanced strength meaningless against supernatural force. One by one, they were dragged down into the darkness, pulled into Alucard's internal landscape of consumed souls. Their bolters clattered to the ground, empty armor following moments later. The Chaos Sorcerer backed away, chanting desperately, trying to summon a warp portal for escape. Purple energy crackled around him, reality beginning to tear. Alucard appeared behind him, still holding Halkoth with one hand. "Going somewhere?" The vampire's free hand shot out, gripping the sorcerer's helmet. "That's unfortunate. I have questions about your warp and your chaos gods. You seem like the academic type." He squeezed. The helmet crumpled like aluminum foil. The sorcerer's skull followed. Alucard dropped the body and turned his full attention to Halkoth. The Lord Commander had fought Eldar aspect warriors, dueled Tau commanders, stood against Orc war bosses. He'd felt pain that would kill mortals instantly. He'd never felt fear like this. "You're different from the others," Alucard observed, studying Halkoth like a specimen. "Enhanced, modified, I can feel the genetic manipulation, the implanted organs, the centuries of combat experience burned into your muscle memory. Fascinating. Your Imperium takes normal humans and turns them into living weapons." "I am not Imperial." Halkoth forced the words through his crushed throat. "I serve the War Master." "Ah yes, Abaddon, the Despoiler." Alucard's eyes gleamed. "I pulled that name from the soldier I drained earlier. Tell me about him. Tell me about this 13th Black Crusade. Tell me everything." "I will tell you nothing, heretic." Alucard sighed. "That's disappointing. I was hoping we could be civilized about this." He bit down on Halkoth's neck. The power armor's gorget should have stopped any blade, any weapon. It was millennia-old ceramite, blessed by chaos, reinforced by sorcery. Alucard's teeth went through it like tissue paper. Halkoth's scream echoed across the battlefield. The vampire drank, and with the blood came everything. Memories flooded into Alucard's consciousness. 3,000 years of war, service to chaos, the long war against the Imperium, the Black Crusades, Abaddon's strategies, the location of chaos command ships, defensive positions, tactical plans, and deeper, darker knowledge. The nature of Chaos Space Marines, the genetic betrayal that created them from the Emperor's finest, the twisted brotherhood of the traitor legions, the eternal hunger for revenge against an Imperium that called them traitors. Alucard released Halkoth's corpse and stood still, processing. 10,000 years, he whispered. "You've been fighting the same war for 10,000 years. Humanity spreading across the galaxy, worshipping a corpse god, while you outcasts strike from the Eye of Terror, trying to tear it all down." He laughed, long and loud. "It's almost beautiful in its futility, both sides locked in eternal stalemate, billions dying for inches of ground, neither side capable of final victory." He looked up at the sky, where the massive warp rift dominated the horizon, the Eye of Terror, that permanent wound in reality where the immaterium bled through into real space. "And that," Alucard said, pointing at the eye, "is the source, the tear in the veil, the place where your chaos gods have their greatest influence." He could feel it calling to him. The warp energy pouring through the rift was immense, a tidal wave of raw immaterium essence flooding into real space. After feeding on demon hordes in the warp itself, Alucard could sense that energy like a wine connoisseur identifying a vintage, and he was still hungry. Comment your theories below. What happens when an unkillable vampire discovers the largest warp rift in the galaxy? Because this story is about to get so much worse. Around him, the battlefield had gone strangely quiet. Both Imperial and Chaos forces had noticed the massacre. Auspex operators on both sides were reporting the same impossible readings. 17 elite Chaos warriors, gone in less than 5 minutes, destroyed by a single unknown hostile. In orbit above Cadia, aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon the Despoiler stared at the report with barely controlled fury. Alkoth had been one of his finest commanders. The kill team he'd sent represented centuries of investment, training, and enhancement, wiped out effortlessly. "What is this creature?" Abaddon demanded. His sorcerers had no answers. On the Imperial side, Lord Castellan Creed watched the same engagement through long-range pict feeds and felt cold certainty settle into his gut. Whatever that thing was, it had just demonstrated power that rivaled a greater demon, and it had done so without any visible chaos corruption, a third faction on Cadia during the most critical battle in human history. "Get me the Inquisition," Creed repeated, his voice grim. "And someone wake up the Grey Knights. We're going to need them." Alucard surveyed the empty armor scattered around him and smiled. "Now then," he said to the burning horizon, to the armies clashing in the distance, to the warp rift bleeding reality above him, "let's see what other surprises this universe has in store." He began walking toward the Eye of Terror, toward the breach, toward the source. The Inquisition moved with terrifying speed. Within an hour of Creed's priority alert, a strike force was assembled from assets already on Cadia. Not because they were close, because they'd been waiting. The Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition dedicated to hunting demons, maintained constant readiness on fortress worlds near the Eye of Terror. Inquisitor Vokran Stern had fought demonic incursions for 60 years. He'd personally banished 2 greater demons, purged 17 chaos cults, and authorized exterminatus on 3 corrupted worlds. He was a hard man in a hard galaxy, and very little shocked him anymore. The picked feed of Alucard's massacre changed that. "Play it again," he commanded, his augmetic eye whirring as it enhanced the footage. The grainy recording showed the kill team's approach, showed the crimson figure waiting, showed the opening volley that should have killed any target. Then, the impossible regeneration, the casual dismemberment of warp talons, the absorption of warp energy, the complete annihilation of veteran chaos warriors. "Assessment," Stern demanded of the tech priest beside him. "Inquisitor," the Mechanicus adept's voice buzzed through vox grills. "The entity displays characteristics consistent with greater demon manifestation, rapid regeneration, immunity to conventional weapons, reality manipulation. However, the warp signature is anomalous. It does not match any known demon classification. Chaos corruption level, unknown. The entity has consumed warp energy, but shows no signs of the usual degradation. If anything, it appears to be digesting it, processing demon essence without succumbing to chaos taint." Stern's jaw tightened. "That's impossible." "Nevertheless, Inquisitor, the evidence suggests—" "I know what the evidence suggests," Stern interrupted. "That's why we're bringing the Grey Knights." The Ordo Malleus's ultimate weapon, the chapter of Space Marines specifically created to fight demons. Each warrior was a psyker, their minds fortified against chaos corruption, their weapons blessed by the Emperor himself. They were humanity's answer to the Immaterium's horrors. If the Grey Knights couldn't stop this thing, nothing in the Imperium could. The strike force deployed via Valkyrie assault carriers, skimming low over the battlefield to avoid the worst of the aerial combat. Stern watched through the troop compartment's viewport as Cadia's nightmare landscape scrolled past, trenches filled with corpses, bunkers burning from phosphex strikes, no man's land churned into red mud by artillery. And ahead, walking calmly through the carnage, was their target. Alucard moved through the battlefield like a tourist at a museum. He stopped occasionally to observe fights, a squad of Cadians making a desperate bayonet charge against cultists, a Lehman Russ tank duel with a Chaos Predator, a Medici station overwhelmed with wounded. He didn't interfere, simply watched, studied, learned. When a stray artillery shell landed 30 meters away, he didn't even flinch, just continued walking, his coat billowing dramatically despite the absence of wind. The Valkyries descended in attack formation, multi-lasers swiveling to track the target. Stern's voice crackled over the Vox. Unknown entity. By the authority of the God Emperor's Holy Inquisition, you are commanded to halt and identify yourself. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination. Alucard stopped walking and looked up at the aircraft. Even from this distance, Stern could see the vampire's smile. "The God Emperor?" Alucard called back. "Is that the corpse you people worship? The one sitting on the golden throne, technically alive but practically dead? I have to say, as far as religions go, that's remarkably on the nose." Stern's hand clenched. "You will show respect for the master of mankind, or what?" Alucard interrupted. "You'll shoot me? Please, I've been shot by better weapons than these. I've been killed by better soldiers than you. And yet here I stand. Open fire." The Valkyries unleashed their full arsenal. Multi-lasers, heavy bolters, missile pods, everything. The air around Alucard became a storm of lasfire and explosive rounds. The ground where he stood erupted into a crater of fire and shrapnel. When the smoke cleared, Alucard stood untouched. "My turn," he said, and pointed. His shadow shot upward like a spear, impossibly long, impossibly fast. It impaled the nearest Valkyrie through its engines. The aircraft's machine spirit screamed as something fundamental was torn away. Not the mechanical components, but the essence that made it more than just metal and wires. The Valkyrie dropped from the sky like a puppet with cut strings. The remaining aircraft scattered, pilots' instincts overriding disbelief. But Alucard's shadows multiplied, becoming dozens of striking tendrils. They reached up like anti-air fire made of living darkness, pulling aircraft from the sky one by one. Stern's Valkyrie juked hard right, barely avoiding a shadow spear. "Deploy the Grey Knights! Now!" The rear ramp dropped, and 5 figures leaped out. They fell 50 meters and landed in perfect formation, their Terminator armor absorbing the impact that would have killed normal humans. Each suit was silver, adorned with purity seals and psychic wards, humming with barely contained power. Their nemesis force weapons, swords and halberds crackling with psychic lightning, activated as they rose. Brother Captain Arvan led them, his psychic presence blazing like a beacon. "In the Emperor's name, demon, you are banished!" He thrust his nemesis force weapon forward, channeling psychic power through the blessed blade. A wave of purifying energy exploded outward. Holy fire designed to burn away warp corruption and banish demons back to the immaterium. It hit Alucard like a wall of divine fury. The vampire staggered back one step. His coat smoked. His skin crackled with psychic discharge. For the first time since arriving in this universe, he looked affected. The Grey Knights advanced, their weapons raised. "You are not natural," Arvan declared. "You are not of this realm, but you are not wholly of the warp either. What are you?" Alucard straightened slowly, brushing psychic embers from his coat. His smile was gone, replaced by genuine interest. "You hurt me," he said, almost pleased. "Not much, but more than anyone else has managed so far. Those weapons, psychic focus, spiritual energy, faith made manifest. Clever, very clever. Answer the question, abomination." Alucard's smile returned, but colder now, sharper. "I am Alucard. I am the no-life king. I am the thing that vampires fear. I have walked the earth for 5 centuries, and I have never encountered warriors quite like you. His eyes gleamed red. This is going to be interesting. The Grey Knights charged as one, their psychic might converging. Stern watched from the circling Valkyrie and whispered a prayer he hadn't said in decades. Because for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure the Emperor's finest would be enough. The Grey Knights hit like a psychic hurricane. Brother Captain Arvan's nemesis Force Halberd cut through the air with a sound like reality tearing, its blade wrapped in silver fire. Brother Castiel flanked left, his Force sword tracing patterns that left after-images of holy light. Brothers Mordran, Therivol, and Kellenvar formed a net of coordinated strikes, each one a psyker trained for decades to fight the Immaterium's worst nightmares. Alucard met them head-on. His hand caught Arvan's halberd mid-strike. The psychic energy crackling along the blade burned his palm, actually burning, smoke rising from flesh that refused to heal as quickly as normal. The vampire grunted, half pain, half satisfaction. "There we go," Alucard said. "Actual damage. I was beginning to think this universe was all bark and no bite." Castiel's sword plunged toward his spine. Alucard twisted impossibly, his body contorting in ways that violated human anatomy, and caught that blade too. His hands were smoking now, holy fire eating at undead flesh, but his grip didn't waver. "Psychic weapons," Alucard observed, holding both Grey Knights at bay through sheer strength. "They channel your mental energy, your faith, your absolute conviction in your Emperor's divinity. They don't just cut flesh, they cut the soul itself." Fascinating. Mordran's Force halberd swept low, aiming to sever Alucard's legs. The vampire released Arvan's weapon and backflipped, his coat swirling as he cleared 10 meters in a single bound. He landed atop a ruined bunker, crouched like a gargoyle. "5 against 1, Alucard called down. "And you're actually making me work for it. I approve. Your Emperor trained you well. Do not speak his name with your corrupted tongue," Arvan roared, his psychic presence flaring. The air around him shimmered with barely contained power. "You who feast on demon essence, you who walk in shadows, you are anathema to all that lives." "Anathema?" Alucard laughed. "I've been called worse, but let's address that demon essence comment. I'm not corrupted by the warp. I'm simply adding it to my collection, like a wine enthusiast trying different vintages." The Grey Knights didn't banter. They attacked again, this time with coordinated psychic might. All 5 warriors channeled their power simultaneously, their combined will forming a lance of pure, faith-driven energy aimed directly at Alucard. The psychic blast hit him like a freight train made of holy fire. He was blown backward through 3 walls of reinforced concrete, his body tumbling, smoking, pieces of him actually vaporizing under the sustained assault. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like it might work. Then his shadows erupted. They exploded from his falling form like a swarm of bats, each one carrying a fragment of his consciousness, each one capable of reformation. The shadows scattered, regrouped, and Alucard rebuilt himself 30 meters away, chest heaving, coat shredded, but grinning like a madman. 8 out of 10, he called. "Excellent execution. That actually hurt. Do it again." Instead, the Grey Knights changed tactics. They spread out, forming a pentagram pattern around Alucard's position. Each warrior began chanting in high Gothic, their voices resonating with psychic power. A ritual. They were performing an exorcism. Silver light began to form between them, flowing from warrior to warrior, creating a web of psychic energy. It was the rite of banishment, a technique designed to forcibly eject demon souls from real space and seal them back in the warp. Alucard felt the pull, felt reality itself trying to reject him, to push him back through the dimensional barriers he'd torn to enter this universe. The sensation was deeply unpleasant, like being slowly crushed from all sides while simultaneously being pulled in 5 different directions. "Clever," he grunted, his form beginning to destabilize. "Using the universe's own natural rejection of warp entities against me. You think I'm a demon, so you're trying to banish me like one. Good theory, wrong conclusion." He closed his eyes and reached inward, into the vast ocean of souls he carried. Millions of consumed lives, each one a fragment of personality and power. He'd been holding them back, keeping them contained, but now he let them loose. The shadows exploded outward as an army. They materialized around him, hundreds of spectral warriors, each one a soul he'd consumed over the centuries. Medieval knights in rusted armor, Nazi soldiers with phantom rifles, rival vampires with fangs bared, innocent victims and guilty monsters alike, all bound to his will, all given form by the psychic pressure of this universe. The Grey Knight's ritual wavered. You couldn't banish an army of ghosts when they weren't technically from the warp. "My turn for a demonstration," Alucard said, his voice multiplied by millions. "Let me show you what 5 centuries of collected death looks like." The Phantom Army charged. Brother Kellenvar met them first, his force sword cutting through spectral flesh. The ghosts dissolved under his blessed blade. 1, 2, 5, 10. But for every one destroyed, 3 more took its place. They swarmed over him, pulling at his armor with translucent hands, searching for gaps in the ceramite. Tharivol burned a path through them with psychic fire, his mind blazing like a star. Dozens of phantoms vaporized under his assault. But Alucard's collection was vast, and the souls kept coming. "Brother Captain," Castiel called out, his voice strained. "There are too many. We need to—" A shadow tendril wrapped around his leg and yanked. Castiel hit the ground hard, his Terminator armor cratering the concrete. More shadows piled on, pinning him down. Arvan made his decision. "Fall back! Tactical retreat to—" Alucard was in front of him. No warning, no movement, simply there, as if he'd teleported. His hand gripped the Brother Captain's helmet, claws digging into blessed silver. "No," Alucard said softly. "No retreating. Not until I understand what you are. What makes you different from the others?" He bit down on Arvan's gorget. The ceramite held for exactly 3 seconds before Alucard's fangs punched through. The Brother Captain's scream echoed across the battlefield, not of pain, but of psychic feedback. Every Grey Knight within a kilometer felt it as Alucard drank, felt their brother's memories being ripped away, felt something ancient and terrible tasting what made them holy. Alucard released Arvan and stumbled back, eyes wide. "You're connected," he whispered. "All of you. To him, to your Emperor, I can feel it. A psychic link, binding you to the entity on that golden throne. He's not just your god. He's actually there, in your minds, lending you power." He looked up at the sky, toward distant Terra, toward the Astronomican's psychic beacon that he could suddenly perceive. He's alive. Barely, but alive. And he's powerful. Unbelievably powerful. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Alucard looked genuinely impressed. The Grey Knights used that moment to retreat, dragging their wounded Brother Captain with them. Alucard let them go, still staring toward Terra. "A god emperor," he murmured. "Still alive after 10,000 years. Still fighting. Still protecting his species even while dying on a throne." His smile returned, but different now. Respectful. "Integra would like you." Alucard stood alone in the ruins, watching the Grey Knights disappear into the smoke and chaos of Cadia's dying cities. Around him, the war continued, artillery thunder, las fire crackling, men screaming as they died by the thousands. The planet was being ground to dust between 2 massive military forces, and neither side seemed close to victory. But Alucard's attention had shifted. He could feel it now. the thing he'd been moving toward since crashing onto this world. The Eye of Terror loomed on the horizon like a malevolent god staring down at the galaxy. From this distance, it dominated half the sky, a swirling vortex of purple, green, and crimson energies where the immaterium bled continuously into real space. The largest warp rift in the galaxy, an all-you-can-eat buffet. Alucard began walking again, his pace unhurried despite the urgency of the battle around him. Stray shells exploded nearby. Fighters screamed overhead in dogfights. A Chaos dreadnought stomped past 300 meters away, its assault cannon shredding an Imperial position. He ignored it all, his senses extended outward, tasting the warp energy that poured from the eye like blood from an arterial wound. It was immense, incomprehensible. The sheer volume of immaterium essence flooding into reality should have been impossible, yet here it was, a permanent tear that had existed for 10,000 years. "So much power," Alucard murmured, "just pouring into your universe. Uncontrolled, raw, and you've been fighting to contain it for millennia." He passed through the front lines without bothering to pick a side. Cadian soldiers spotted him first, saw the crimson coat, the inhuman grace, the aura of wrongness, and opened fire on instinct. Cultists followed suit seconds later, their corrupted weapons joining the barrage. Alucard walked through it like rain, lasbolts and stubber rounds and even a few plasma shots that turned the air around him into superheated hell. His body was torn apart dozens of times per second, regenerating just as fast, leaving a trail of blood mist that evaporated before hitting the ground. A chaos. Rhino APC rumbled toward him, its dozer blade raised to crush him into the rubble. Alucard raised one hand. His shadow shot forward, engulfing the 30-ton vehicle completely. There was a moment of resistance. The machine spirit screaming, the crew inside cursing, then the shadow contracted. The Rhino compressed like a tin can in a hydraulic press, metal shrieking as it folded in on itself. The compressed wreckage fell beside him with a dull thud. Alucard stepped over it, without breaking stride. In orbit, Abaddon the Despoiler watched through long-range augers and felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia. Uncertainty. "It's heading toward the breach," his master of divination reported, the sorcerer's voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Toward the eye itself." "What is it doing?" Abaddon demanded. I don't know, War Master. The warp refuses to show me. Every divination I cast shatters, every scrying fails. It's as if the future itself is uncertain." Abaddon's hands clenched into fists. Tzeentch, the god of fate and change, had always provided visions, always shown the paths forward. That the future was now unclear meant something unprecedented was occurring. "Send everything," Abaddon ordered. "Every unit in that sector. I want that thing buried under bodies until we understand what we're dealing with." "My lord, that will leave our southern flank." "I don't care about flanks. That thing has killed 2 of my kill teams and is heading directly toward our most sacred site. Move!" The Black Legion responded with terrible efficiency. Chaos Space Marines redeployed from active combat zones. Traitor Guard regiments wheeled their heavy weapons around. Demon engines, defilers, and mauler fiends and worse began their ponderous advance toward Alucard's position. They formed a wall between him and the Eye of Terror. Thousands of warriors, hundreds of vehicles, dozens of demon-possessed machines. An army within an army, all focused on stopping one figure in red. Alucard saw them gathering and smiled. "Now this," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This is more like it." He didn't slow down, didn't stop, just kept walking. The first Chaos Marines opened fire at maximum range, bolters roaring, autocannons hammering. The air between them and Alucard became solid with explosive rounds. The ground erupted into a storm of detonations. Alucard walked through it. His body was being destroyed continuously now, blown apart faster than he could regenerate, reduced to red mist and shadow. But the shadow kept moving forward, kept reforming, kept advancing. For every meter they pushed him back with firepower, he gained 2 when they had to reload. A Chaos Predator tank's Lascannon caught him center mass, the laser beam vaporizing his entire torso. His legs kept walking, his upper body reformed from shadow, stepping back into his lower half without missing a beat. "You're trying to kill something that's already dead," Alucard called out, his voice somehow carrying over the thunder of war. "How many times do I need to explain this concept?" A defiler, a spider-like demon engine with a massive battle cannon for a torso, fired point blank. The explosion should have atomized anything within 50 meters. Alucard emerged from the fireball, his coat streaming flames that he casually patted out. "I walked through London during the Blitz," he said conversationally, dodging a Morlophine's power fists with insulting ease. "I survived strategic bombing campaigns. I've been hit by V2 rockets, and those were designed by mere mortals." He caught the Morlophine's next strike, stopping the demon engine's charge dead. "Your weapons are impressive, but I've seen worse." He ripped the Morlophine apart, tearing through demon-possessed metal with his bare hands, and drank the warp essence that animated it. The Chaos Forces redoubled their assault. They threw everything they had: plasma, melter, missiles, shells, lasfire, even blessed demon weapons. The concentration of firepower was sufficient to level a city block. Alucard was buried under it, consumed by overlapping explosions, lost in a maelstrom of destruction. The firing stopped. Smoke cleared slowly, revealing a crater 20 meters deep. For a moment, there was silence. Then the shadows in the crater began to move. They rose like a tidal wave, carrying Alucard with them, lifting him up until he stood 50 meters above the battlefield on a pillar of living darkness. His form was different now, larger, more monstrous, his eyes burning red, his smile showing too many teeth. "My turn," he said, and the shadows fell upon them like a plague. The screaming began. Still hungry for more tales from the dark Millennium? Subscribe and witness what happens when an immortal predator decides enough is enough. Alucard tore through the Chaos Army like a scythe through wheat, his shadows consuming warriors by the dozen, his familiars ripping apart demon engines, his own hands crushing ceramite armor like paper. With each kill, he grew stronger. With each demon consumed, he drew closer to his goal. The eye of terror pulsed on the horizon, and Alucard could taste it. Almost there. The massacre lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the ground was carpeted with empty power armor and destroyed vehicles. Hundreds of Chaos warriors, gone, not dead in the traditional sense, consumed, absorbed, added to Alucard's ever-growing collection of souls. The vampire stood at the center of the carnage, breathing heavily despite not needing to breathe, his form crackling with stolen warp energy. He was close now, so close he could feel the eyes pull like gravity. The landscape before him had changed. The battlefield gave way to something worse. The Cadian pylons, ancient structures of black stone that had held back the warp's influence for millennia. Most were destroyed now, shattered by Abaddon's relentless assault. But their ruins still dotted the terrain like broken teeth. And beyond them, reality simply ended. The boundary between real space and the eye of terror wasn't a clean line. It was a gradient of madness, where physical laws became suggestions, where time flowed sideways, where the immaterium's essence poured through like water through a broken dam. The sky itself was torn, revealing the nightmare realm beyond. Alucard walked toward it like a moth toward flame. With each step, the warp's influence grew stronger. His shadow lengthened unnaturally. The air tasted of copper and ozone and things that had no taste. Reality itself began to protest his presence. Or perhaps it was protesting the eye's presence, and he was simply caught in the middle. "Magnificent," he whispered, staring up at the rift. "Absolutely magnificent. A permanent wound in the universe itself, and you've been feeding from it for 10,000 years. He could feel them now, the Chaos Gods, their attention focused on him with renewed intensity. They'd watched him slaughter their mortal servants, watched him consume their demon armies, watched him walk uncorrupted through their corruption. And now he was approaching their greatest foothold in real space. The air shimmered, and something manifested before him. Not a demon this time, something worse, an avatar, a fragment of divine will given temporary form. It shifted constantly, impossible to focus on, showing aspects of all four Chaos Gods simultaneously. Khorne's brass and skulls, Tzeentch's shifting colors and eyes, Nurgle's rot and exposed organs, Slaaneish's terrible beauty and promise of excess. When it spoke, it was with four voices in perfect harmony. No further. Alucard stopped, tilted his head and smiled. "Ah, the management has arrived. I was wondering when you'd stop sending employees and handle this personally. You dare approach our domain. You dare consume our essence. You dare exist in defiance of us." "I've been daring things for 5 centuries, Alucard replied. "It's sort of my defining characteristic. That and the whole immortal vampire thing." The avatar's form rippled with barely contained power. "You are not of this universe. You do not belong. Why do you not break? Why do you not corrupt? Why do you not bow?" "Because," Alucard said simply, "I already serve a master, and she's more terrifying than all 4 of you combined." The avatar laughed, a sound like reality cracking. "A mortal master? You, who have consumed thousands of our servants, bow to a mere human?" "She's not mere anything." Alucard's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "She is Integra Hellsing, my master, my chain, my purpose. And yes, I bow to her, because I choose to, because someone who can command something like me with nothing but her will and a few words deserves that respect." "Then you are a slave." "No," Alucard corrected. "I'm a monster on a leash. There's a difference. Slaves wish for freedom, I wish for purpose. She gives me that." The avatar was silent for a moment, processing. 4 divine intellects considering this impossibility. A creature of ultimate power voluntarily submitting to mortal authority. "We could offer you more," the voices said. "Khorne offers endless battle. Tzeentch offers infinite knowledge. Nurgle offers acceptance. Slaanesh offers sensation beyond mortality." "I've had endless battle. I'm bored with it," Alucard counted on his fingers. "I've accumulated enough knowledge to know that most of it's useless. I've accepted what I am centuries ago. And as for sensation," he laughed, "I've experienced everything your god of excess could offer and found it tedious." "Then what do you want?" Alucard pointed past the avatar, toward the Eye of Terror itself. "That, I want to drink from your rift. I want to consume the warp energy pouring into this universe. I want to taste the power of gods." The avatar's form destabilized, rage and confusion mixing. "Impossible. That would weaken you." Alucard's grin widened. "I certainly hope so. You've been bullying this galaxy for 10,000 years. Time someone reminded you that even gods can bleed. You cannot defeat us. We are eternal. We are chaos itself." "Maybe," Alucard acknowledged. "But I don't need to defeat you. I just need to eat enough of your power to cause you some indigestion. Consider it a vampire's meal plan." The avatar raised its limbs, claws and tentacles and blades all at once. "Then you will be destroyed, not consumed, not corrupted, destroyed, erased from existence across all timelines. We will unmake you so completely that you will never have existed." "You can try," Alucard said, his form beginning to shift, to expand, to become something monstrous. "But I've been trying to die for centuries. Every attempt has failed. Every executioner has fallen. Every weapon has proven insufficient." His shadows exploded outward, taking shape, his true form, or as close as this reality could handle. A massive thing of darkness and eyes and teeth towering over the battlefield. A nightmare given flesh, the accumulated death of 5 centuries made manifest. "So come then, Chaos Gods," Alucard's voice boomed, multiplied by millions of consumed souls. "Show me what deities can do. Show me if gods are any different from the countless others who've tried to end me." The avatar screamed. 4 voices of divine fury, and reality itself began to tear. In the warp, in their domains beyond mortal comprehension, the Chaos Gods made a decision they had never made before. They had fought each other for eons, competed for worship, sabotaged each other's schemes. But now, faced with something that threatened them all, they did the unthinkable. They united. In the brass citadel, Khorne stood from his throne. In the impossible fortress, Tzeentch ceased his schemes. In the garden, Nurgle stopped laughing. In the palace of pleasure, Slaanesh focused completely. And together they began to forge something that had never existed before. A champion of all 4 gods. A Fourfold Daemon. An avatar of chaos, undivided, given form and fury and one single purpose: kill Alucard. The warp screamed. In the Immaterium, the 4 Chaos Gods poured their essence into a single vessel, a contradiction made manifest, a unification that violated their very natures. Khorne's infinite rage flowed together with Tzeentch's schemes, braided with Nurgle's entropy, wrapped in Slaanesh's excess. The creation process was agony. The gods were competing forces, eternally opposed, yet now they bent their wills towards singular purpose. The result was something that should not exist. It materialized above Cadia's surface like a second sun being born in reverse, a sphere of absolute darkness that absorbed all light, all hope, all sanity. The sphere expanded, cracked, and from within it stepped the Fourfold Daemon. It was massive, 30 meters tall, its form constantly shifting between states. One moment it had Khorne's brass armor and demon skull. The next, Tzeentch's impossible geometries and too many eyes. Then Nurgle's bloated decay and weeping sores. Finally, Slaanesh's terrible beauty and hypnotic grace. All 4, simultaneously, a walking paradox that bent reality around it simply by existing. Its roar shook the planet. Every psyker within 1,000 kilometers began bleeding from their eyes. The Astronomican's light flickered. Even the Grey Knights, retreating kilometers away, fell to their knees under the psychic pressure. Alucard looked up at the thing and laughed with pure delight. Now that's more like it. Finally something worthy of the effort. The Fourfold Daemon descended like a meteor, its massive foot cratering the ground where Alucard had stood a second before. The vampire had already moved, his form dissolving into shadow and reforming 50 meters away. Fast, Alucard observed, despite the size. Slaanesh's influence, I'm guessing. Excellent coordination between divine aspects. 8 out of 10 so far, but let's see if you can maintain it. The demon didn't banter. It raised one arm, simultaneously a brass claw, a tentacle, a rotted limb, and a perfect hand, and reality simply broke where it pointed. The fabric of space-time tore open, revealing raw warp beneath. Demons poured through, bloodletters and horrors and plaguebearers and demonettes, all manifesting at once, thousands of them, an army spawned from nothing. Oh, summoning backup? Alucard's grin widened. I suppose when you're multiple gods in one body, you can afford to cheat. His own shadows erupted in response. The phantom army of consumed souls, now swollen with the chaos warriors he'd absorbed, materialized around him. Medieval knights clashed with bloodletters. Nazi soldiers fired phantom rifles at pink horrors. Vampire spawn tore into demonettes with feral hunger. The two supernatural armies collided in a maelstrom of violence that defied physics. But Alucard and the Fourfold Daemon ignored their minions. They had eyes only for each other. The demon charged, its speed impossible for something so massive. Each footfall shattered the ground, leaving craters that glowed with warp fire. It swung a blade that was simultaneously Khorne's brass, Tzeentch's crystal, Nurgle's rust, and Slanesh's silver. Alucard caught it with both hands. The impact created a shockwave that flattened everything within 100 meters. The ground beneath Alucard's feet cracked and cratered, his arms bent, muscles straining, bones creaking under pressure that could crush tanks. "Strong," he grunted, "very strong, but I've held back worse." He twisted, redirecting the blade's momentum, and drove his foot into the demon's knee. The joint buckled, just slightly, just enough, and Alucard used that opening to slip beneath its guard. His hand plunged into the demon's chest, fingers digging through armor and flesh and warp stuff, searching for something vital. The creature roared and backhanded him with enough force to send him flying through 3 ruined buildings. Alucard emerged from the rubble, spitting blood and laughing. "You actually hurt me, genuinely hurt me. Do you know how rare that is?" The demon's chest wound was already healing, 4 different types of regeneration overlapping, Khorne's aggression knitting it closed, Tzeentch's reality manipulation rewinding the damage, Nurgle's acceptance making injury meaningless, Slanesh's perfectionism restoring its form. "Ah," Alucard said, understanding dawning. "Fourfold regeneration, each god's healing factor stacked on top of the others. Clever. That means I'll have to destroy you faster than 4 gods can repair you." He released his restraints. The change was immediate and terrifying. Alucard's form exploded into something vast and terrible, a mass of shadows and eyes and teeth that dwarfed even the Fourfold Daemon, his true form, or the closest approximation this reality could handle without breaking completely. The shadowy mass coalesced into a hound, Baskerville, but grown to kaiju proportions, its jaws large enough to swallow skyscrapers, its eyes burning with the accumulated malice of millions of consumed souls. The Fourfold Daemon and the Hellhound circled each other, 2 impossibilities locked in combat. They collided. The impact was visible from orbit, a flash of crimson and purple-black energy that lit up Cadia's night side. The shockwave flattened entire city blocks. The psychic backlash killed every unprotected human within 5 kilometers instantly. Baskerville's jaws clamped down on the demon's arm and ripped. Divine ichor sprayed, blood that was simultaneously brass red, crystal blue, pus green, and flesh pink. The demon screamed in 4 voices and retaliated, its free hand transforming into a lance of pure warp energy that punched through the Hellhound's torso. Both combatants regenerated instantly and struck again. They fought through the streets of ruined Kasser Kraf, their battle tearing apart what little remained of the city. They fought through trenches filled with cowering soldiers from both sides, neither Imperial nor Chaos forces able to comprehend what they were witnessing. They fought up the side of a hive spire, their claws carving handholds in adamantium, until they reached the peak and continued their battle in midair. The demon summoned warp fire, flames that burned souls rather than flesh. Alucard absorbed it, drank it down, and spat it back as corrupted shadow. The demon countered with Khorne's rage made manifest, raw violence that could shatter planets. Alucard met it with 5 centuries of accumulated death, and found them evenly matched. Minutes passed, then hours. The battlefield became a crater. The crater became a canyon. The canyon became an abyss that glowed with competing energies, crimson shadow and quadruple warp corruption, locked in eternal struggle. Neither could gain advantage, neither could fall. And slowly, terribly, Cadia began to break beneath them. The planet's crust cracked, magma welled up through fissures. The tectonic plates, already stressed by weeks of orbital bombardment, began to shift and grind. Gravity fluctuated wildly as the warp energies interfered with fundamental forces. In orbit, both Imperial and Chaos forces detected the same readings. Cadia was dying, not from Abaddon's Blackstone fortress, not from the 13th Black Crusade's culmination, but from the battle between a vampire and the combined avatars of Chaos itself. The planet was screaming. Cadia's crust buckled and tore, ancient foundations that had withstood 10,000 years of warfare finally giving way. Seismic sensors across the planet registered readings that exceeded their maximum thresholds. Entire hive cities tilted and collapsed. Oceans boiled away into superheated steam. The very gravity began fluctuating as the concentration of warp energy interfered with fundamental physical laws. Lord Castellan Creed stood in his command bunker, watching the seismic data with the cold certainty of a man witnessing the end of his world. "Evacuate," he ordered, his voice hoarse from weeks of continuous command. "All forces, full planetary evacuation. Cadia falls today." His staff stood frozen in disbelief. Cadia had never fallen, would never fall. It was a sacred principle, a foundation of Imperial doctrine. "Sir," his second-in-command whispered, "Cadia stands." "Not anymore," Creed interrupted. "Look at the data. The planet is breaking apart. Whatever those two things are, their battle is tearing the world to pieces." He turned to face his officers. "Cadia stands no longer, but the Guard does. Get our people off this rock before there's nothing left to stand on." In orbit, Abaddon watched the same data streams and felt something between triumph and fury. He'd spent centuries planning the 13th Black Crusade, dedicated fleets, armies, demon packs, and the immense strategic effort required to gather Chaos's fractured forces into a unified assault. Cadia was falling. His objective was being achieved, but not by him. "That thing!" he snarled, pointing at the combat zone where two impossible entities battled. "That creature from nowhere is stealing my victory!" His sorcerers had no response. What could they say? The War Master had been outmaneuvered by something that wasn't even from this universe. Below, the battle reached its crescendo. Alucard, still in his monstrous hellhound form, had clamped his jaws around the Fourfold Daemon's throat. His teeth, each one the size of a tank, ground through divine flesh and warp essence. The demon retaliated by driving all four of its arms through Baskerville's body, each limb transformed into a different weapon of divine destruction. They were locked together, each one trying to consume the other, each one regenerating as fast as they were destroyed. The ground beneath them had been carved down to bedrock, then through bedrock, into the mantle itself. Magma fountained around them, but neither combatant noticed. Alucard felt it first. The shift in the demon's tactics. The creature stopped trying to kill him. Instead, it started pulling. Its form became less solid, more energy than matter, and it began dragging Alucard toward the Eye of Terror, toward the massive warp rift that dominated the horizon. The demon's four divine voices spoke in unison. "If you cannot be killed, you will be banished, cast into the warp, trapped in our domain forever." Alucard's eyes widened as he understood. The Chaos Gods had changed strategies. They couldn't destroy him, so they would imprison him instead, drag him through the Eye of Terror, and seal him in the Immaterium where they held absolute power. It was actually a decent plan. "Clever," Alucard admitted, his voice distorted by his monstrous form. "But there's one problem with your strategy." He released his grip on the demon, and instead embraced it. His shadows wrapped around the Fourfold Daemon like a cocoon, pulling it closer even as it tried to drag him toward the eye. They became a binary system of destruction, two forces locked together, falling toward the warp rift. "If you're going to throw me into the warp," Alucard's million voices declared, "I'm taking you with me. Let's see how well you function when I'm consuming you in your own home territory." The demon's four faces showed something new: uncertainty. They hit the edge of the Eye of Terror together. Reality simply ceased. The boundary between the materium and immaterium dissolved around them, and they plunged into the raw stuff of chaos itself. Colors that couldn't exist painted the void. Time flowed in all directions simultaneously. Physical laws became polite suggestions, and Alucard began to feed. He consumed the Fourfold Daemon with savage efficiency, his shadows drilling into it like parasites, drinking its divine essence directly. The creature thrashed, tried to escape, but they were in the warp now, Alucard's hunting ground. He'd spent subjective eons in the immaterium already, had learned its rules, had adapted to its madness. The demon hadn't expected him to be stronger here. Piece by piece, Alucard tore it apart, drank Khorne's rage, absorbed Tzeentch's schemes, consumed Nurgle's decay, devoured Slaanesh's excess. The four gods had poured massive amounts of their power into this avatar, and now that power was being stolen, integrated, added to Alucard's already vast reserves. In their domains, the Chaos Gods felt it, felt their avatar being consumed, felt their combined essence being drained away by something that shouldn't exist. They panicked. The warp convulsed. The Eye of Terror pulsed with violent energy. And in that moment of divine distraction, something else intervened. A golden light pierced the immaterium. It came from distant terror, from the Golden Throne itself, a psychic beacon so bright it was visible across the galaxy. The Astronomicon, the Emperor's guiding light, flared with unprecedented intensity. And behind that light came his will, the God Emperor of mankind. That corpse god sitting on his throne for 10,000 years turned his attention toward Cadia, toward the Eye of Terror, toward the battle that threatened to tear reality apart. Alucard felt it like divine pressure pressing down on his consciousness. Felt the attention of something truly ancient, truly powerful, focused entirely on him. When the Emperor's psychic voice spoke, it resonated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Enough. The word carried weight beyond sound. It was command, judgment, and warning, all compressed into a single syllable. Alucard felt himself being pushed back, away from the eye, away from the half-consumed demon, back toward real space. "Oh no, you don't," Alucard snarled, fighting against the psychic tide. "I'm not done here. You have consumed sufficient essence. You have disrupted the balance. Leave this place." "Make me," Alucard challenged, his form expanding to resist the pressure. "You're powerful, corpse god, I'll grant you that, but I don't bow to gods, not yours, not theirs, not anyone's except my master's." "Then, for her sake, I give you this warning. Leave now, or be destroyed." The golden light intensified, becoming unbearable even in the warp. The Emperor's full power was focusing, gathering, preparing to unleash psychic force sufficient to obliterate planets. Alucard grinned, defiant to the last. "You'll have to do better than—" The psychic blast hit him like the fist of an angry god. The God Emperor's psychic might was beyond mortal comprehension. It was the accumulated faith of a billion souls across 10,000 years, focused through a being who had walked the earth since before recorded history. It was hope and duty and sacrifice compressed into a weapon of pure will. It was every prayer ever offered to the Golden Throne made manifest, and it hit Alucard with the force of a supernova. The vampire was blown backward through the warp like a leaf in a hurricane. His monstrous form shattered, fragmented, scattered across 7 dimensions simultaneously. The half-consumed Fourfold Daemon fell away, retreating into the depths of the immaterium to regenerate. The eye of terror pulsed once violently, and then reality pushed. The universe itself, guided by the Emperor's will, rejected Alucard, forced him out. The immaterium contracted around him like a closing fist, squeezing him back toward the wound he'd torn on arrival, back toward the rift he'd created above Cadia. Alucard fought it, clawed against the tide. His shadows spread like anchors, trying to hold on to the warp itself. But the Emperor's power was absolute here. This was humanity's psychic god defending his domain, and even Alucard's immense strength couldn't overcome 10,000 years of accumulated divine authority. He was ejected from the warp like a bullet from a gun. The rift he'd torn, that ragged wound in reality above Cadia, became his exit point. He shot through it backward, trailing shadows and stolen warp essence, his form compressing painfully as he transitioned from immaterium to real space. Behind him, the Emperor's golden light sealed the rift. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to close that particular doorway, to ensure Alucard couldn't simply dive back into the warp for another feeding frenzy. Alucard tumbled through the void above Cadia, his consciousness scattered, his form unstable. Slowly, painfully, he began pulling himself back together, shadow to flesh, chaos to order, monster to man. When his eyes opened, he was floating in space above a dying planet. Cadia was breaking apart beneath him. The continent-sized chunks of crust were separating, magma visible in the widening gaps. The oceans had boiled away completely. The atmosphere was on fire. Evacuation ships streamed away like fleeing insects, thousands of vessels carrying millions of refugees toward the waiting fleets. The planet had hours left, maybe less. Alucard looked down at his hands. They were crackling with stolen warp energy, veins of purple, green, red, pink power running beneath his skin like luminescent poison. He'd consumed a significant portion of the Fourfold Daemon's essence before being interrupted. Had added the power of 4 chaos gods, or at least a meaningful fraction of it, to his already vast reserves. He felt incredible, stronger than he'd been in centuries. Powerful enough that reality itself seemed thin around him, as if he could tear through it with casual effort. But he'd also been forcibly ejected by something even more powerful. "Integra," he whispered into the void, his voice carrying on psychic winds. "I found something that could actually threaten me. A corpse god 10,000 years old, still protecting his species from beyond death. You would have approved of his dedication." He looked back toward the Eye of Terror. The massive warp rift still dominated the sky, but it seemed smaller now, less aggressive. The Chaos Gods were licking their wounds, their combined avatar half consumed, their foothold in real space temporarily weakened. Alucard had hurt them, actually hurt deities. The thought made him smile. Below, the last evacuation ships were fleeing Cadia's gravity well. The planet's death throes were accelerating, seismic activity off the scales, gravity fluctuations tearing apart anything still on the surface, the very bedrock of the world coming undone. In one final, spiteful gesture, Cadia was taking the scars of their battle to its grave. Alucard closed his eyes and reached inward, to that place where he carried millions of consumed souls. Among them, freshly added, were the memories of the sergeant he'd first drained. The Cadian's entire life, his pride in his world, his dedication to the Guard, his absolute conviction that Cadia would never fall. "I'm sorry," Alucard said softly. "Your world stood for 10,000 years, but it couldn't withstand what I brought." He felt the rift trying to pull at him again. The dimensional tear that had brought him to this universe in the first place. It was still there, still open, calling to him like an exit sign in a burning building. Alucard considered his options. He could stay. Try to survive in this universe of eternal war, facing down the Imperium, the Chaos Gods, and who knew what other horrors lurked in the galaxy. It would be challenging, interesting even, but the Emperor had made his position clear. Leave or be destroyed. And Alucard, for all his power, recognized when he'd met something truly dangerous. The God Emperor wasn't some two-bit deity or jumped-up demon prince. He was an entity of genuine power, backed by the faith of an entire species, still fighting after 10 millennia of being technically dead. That commanded respect. Another time, perhaps, Alucard said, turning toward the dimensional rift. When I'm not interrupting your species' survival, when you're not busy holding back chaos with nothing but willpower and accumulated faith, when we can meet properly. He began moving toward the rift, his form shifting, preparing for the dimensional transition. Behind him, Cadia finally broke. The planet cracked along its equator, the two halves beginning to separate. The core was exposed now, a dying sun of molten metal that would cool to nothing in the void. Billions had lived there once. Now it was a corpse, another casualty in the galaxy's endless war, but its people survived. The Guard evacuated, the Imperial Navy rescued who they could, and across the Imperium, a new phrase was already spreading. Cadia stands, not the planet, never again the planet, but the people. The soldiers, the Guard, they stood. They would always stand. Alucard reached the dimensional rift and paused at its edge. He looked back one final time at this universe of grimdark horror and eternal war. 41,000 years of this, he said, shaking his head. You poor bastards. You're all so dedicated to your endless struggle. Humanity fighting for survival. Chaos fighting for dominance, gods fighting gods, and none of you can win because victory isn't the point. The war itself is the point. He smiled, showing too many teeth. I understand that now. You're not trying to win. You're trying to endure, to last one more day, to hold the line one more century, to prove that humanity, broken, scattered, worshipping a corpse, can still defy gods and demons and the universe itself through nothing but spite and determination. He saluted the dying planet, the evacuating fleets, the distant terror where an emperor sat dying for 10,000 years to keep his species alive. The Emperor protects, Alucard said, and meant it. And may he continue to do so, because this galaxy needs him. Then he stepped through the rift and vanished, taking his stolen power and terrible presence back to whatever dimension had spawned him. The rift sealed behind him with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. In the warp, the Chaos Guards withdrew to lick their wounds and plot revenge against something that had consumed part of their avatar. On Terra, the Emperor's attention shifted back to the Astronomicon, back to holding the Imperium together for another day. And in the void where Cadia had once stood, the scattered fragments of a fortress world drifted slowly apart, monuments to a battle that had involved not two powers, but three. The Imperium would remember this as the day Cadia fell to the 13th Black Crusade. Chaos would remember it as a Pyrrhic victory, won but costly. But a handful of witnesses, Grey Knights, Inquisitors, and senior commanders would remember the truth. The day an impossibility crashed into their universe. The day a vampire fought chaos itself to a standstill. The day reality learned that some nightmares don't belong to any one dimension. In the 41st millennium, there is only war. That truth remained unchanged, even after Alucard's departure. The Imperium continued its eternal struggle. The Chaos Gods plotted their schemes, and humanity endured as it always had, through faith, fury, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. But something had changed, even if few knew it. The Grey Knights who survived the encounter carried the memory in their sanctified minds. They had fought something that wasn't demon, wasn't chaos, wasn't anything their 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge could classify. Brother Captain Arvan, recovered from his wounds, submitted a report that was immediately sealed under inquisitorial authority and marked with the highest security classification. Some knowledge was too dangerous even for the Emperor's finest. Inquisitor Stern added his own report, his conclusions grim. Interdimensional breaches were not merely theoretical. Something had crossed over from another reality, consumed demon essence without corruption, and fought a combined avatar of the four chaos gods to a standstill. If it could happen once, it could happen again. The Ordo Malleus established new protocols, new watchwords, new prayers for threats that came not from within reality, but from outside it entirely. On distant Terra, deep within the Golden Throne's sanctum, the Emperor's consciousness flickered with something that might have been satisfaction. The vampire had been powerful, yes, dangerous certainly, but also controlled, bound by loyalty to a mortal master despite possessing godlike power. That spoke of discipline, of choice, of the kind of character that transcended mere strength. If such beings existed in other realities, perhaps humanity's long war was not as hopeless as it seemed. Perhaps there were allies yet unfound, powers yet unmet, hope in the most unlikely places. Or perhaps they were simply fortunate that Alucard had been leashed, had been commanded by someone with wisdom enough to direct such terrible power toward worthy targets. Without Integra Hellsing's guiding hand across dimensional barriers, who knows what destruction an unchained no-life king might have wrought. The Emperor's thoughts turned back to the Astronomicon, to the million psycho souls consumed daily to keep his light burning, to the endless burden of keeping humanity alive for just one more day. Some battles never ended, some vigils never ceased, but they continued because they must, because someone had to hold the line, even when the line seemed impossible to hold. In that, perhaps, the God Emperor and the vampire were not so different. Both were monsters, transformed by necessity into guardians. Both were imprisoned, one by a golden throne, one by voluntary servitude. Both wielded terrible power in service to something they deemed worthy of that power. Both understood that true strength wasn't measured in raw force, but in the choice of when and how to unleash it. The Chaos Gods, in their domains, felt the absence of their stolen power like phantom pain. The Fourfold Daemon had been their masterwork, their desperate gambit, and it had been half consumed by something they still didn't fully understand. They would rebuild it, eventually, but the experience had taught them something they'd forgotten across eons of dominance. They could be hurt. They could lose. They were not as invincible as they believed, and somewhere, in some other reality, an entity existed that could make even gods bleed. That knowledge would haunt them. But perhaps that was fitting. Let the gods of chaos know fear for once. Let them understand what it felt like to face something they couldn't corrupt, couldn't kill, couldn't comprehend. Let them remember that the multiverse was vast, and they were not its only apex predators. Cadia's fragments continued their slow drift through space, future monuments to battles both known and classified. Imperial historians would record the 13th Black Crusade, Abaddon's victory, the fortress world's heroic last stand. That would be the official truth, the deeper truth. That reality itself had been invaded by an interdimensional vampire who'd gorged on chaos and fought four gods at once, would remain hidden. Some stories were too dangerous to tell, some legends too powerful to spread. But in quiet corners of the Imperium, among the Grey Knights' fortress monastery, in sealed inquisitorial vaults, the truth remained, waiting, just in case the rift opened again. Just in case the no-life king returned. Just in case humanity needed to remember that the universe was stranger, more dangerous, and more full of terrible possibility than even their grimdark reality suggested. The Emperor protects, but the Emperor also remembers, and he would be watching, waiting, preparing for the day when dimensions might bleed together once more. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But now they knew that war might not always be fought against enemies they recognized, and perhaps, in the strangest twist of fate, that was almost reassuring. Because if horrors from other dimensions could cross into their reality, then perhaps their own champions, their saints and heroes, might one day cross outward, might bring the Emperor's light to universes that had never known it, might prove that even in the darkest millennium, humanity's spirit could not be contained by something as simple as dimensional barriers. The war would continue. It always did. But the battlefield had just gotten infinitely larger, and in that vastness, that infinite possibility, there lived a certain kind of hope. Grim, desperate, and defiant. Exactly the kind of hope that had kept humanity alive for 40,000 years. Exactly the kind of hope they would need for 40,000 more. The Emperor protects. More stories await.